Hey guys, so welcome back. This time we're going back to Whatifalthist. His last video, How Canada Will Fall, I've already reacted to. That one got a pretty good response because I think, to put it lightly, I think I was quite nice in that video in a proper Canadian way. But I think that a lot of his predictions were really off. I don't think they were very well founded. So I'm very curious to see what he's going to do for explaining the borders of the 22nd century. So once again, comment what you guys think if you've seen this video before, where you think his predictions are off, where maybe some of my predictions will be off, and we'll go from there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's keep going.
A year and a half ago, and people since then have really wanted me to make a video explaining why I made these what appear to be pretty strange border predictions for the world in 100 years. Well, here it is.
Okay, so already off the top of, from what I can see, right, we've already, so he's fully doubled down on his How Canada Will Fall prediction, because Canada has been eaten by the USA. Brazil seems to have consumed every country around it. Okay, and then the American Latin. All right. Right. Oh, and it looks like actually Haiti and the Dominican are owned by Brazil. So right off the bat, this looks completely ridiculous, right? Not even to speak of what's going on here in Europe, with Russia being condensed down to this, China owning most of Siberia, Korea being united. I'm going to assume under the South. Australia's fine. New Zealand's fine. And a non-state. Wow, there is a lot to digest here. But this looks completely insane from just a first look. But all right, I'm very curious to see what he says. Let's see what our fellow Canadian has to say.
This is a video to go through the borders of every
So I found his mic's
to
quite
explain
quiet. So
what I think they'll be like in the year
that's
2120.
That's a bit better.
So without ado, let's get started.
This one's wow. I got pretty much nothing to say right off the bat.
A couple times I've wondered what's exactly the product that would pander to Whatifalthist fans the best. Well, I think I found it. Bismarck Analysis is a consulting firm that helps with companies, governments, philanthropists, and the like advance our collective civilization. They're aligned with Whatifalthist and the goals of helping our society through the crisis that we're about to face with all the wisdom we'll need. Like Whatifalthist, they try to look at the historical trends that result in the rise and fall of civilizations, and then project them forwards into the future. They also have an incredible brief that you can start reading for free, which covers the exact same topics as Whatifalthist that I recommend you check out.
Okay.
Some examples of their latest productions are France is Europe's best shot at rearmament, Russia's rapid reforms bring military theory into practice, and Gates Foundation blind spot. Their writing and thought is top-notch. If you want to dig deeper into topics I've covered in Whatifalthist, Bismarck...
that one was a bit of a 50-50 there.
I'm the CEO, and we're working on a coordinated Whatifalthist Bismarck video right now. Click the link in the description to start using
I was not sure if that was an ad there or not. That was a bit of a 50-50.
Something I want to remind this audience about is that this map isn't gospel, and I'm not certain the world will turn out like this.
Okay, good. At least he starts off by saying that.
My fans take this map and other maps I make more seriously than I do, and this map is a series of implicit assumptions that I think will be correct, but could easily be wrong.
That is the video I'm going to react next to. Easily. All right, now I'm curious.
For more information
thank you for the next
what
video,
the assumptions I'm making are, you should check out this video on the four trajectories of the 21st century.
I will.
As an example, I make the assumption that one group of humans won't genetically engineer themselves into superhuman status and gain world domination, or runaway climate change doesn't occur. Both of these are within the range of possibilities.
Did he just say...
Or I've heard compelling arguments both for greater centralization and greater decentralization in the future, and I'm frankly not sure what side will win, and so I created a midway scenario here. As I always say, I'm betting against God here, and there are infinite ways to be wrong with predictions and only a handful to be right. With that out of the way, let's get started. Part 1. North America. Canada is the most confusing and complicated part of this map. In a previous rendition of the script just explaining the Canadian section, took a tremendous amount of the video, but luckily enough, since then,
there you
I've
go.
made a
There you
video
go.
about the potential future of Canada. Click the link to that.
Which is something that I
The long and
thoroughly
short of it,
disagree
however, is
with.
that
But
Canada is a loose confederacy of various provinces with very different self-interests, and these provinces build
we got
various
into that. Like I
coalitions
said,
and
check out the
arrangements in
video
order to keep
on
Canada a
how
unified
Canada will fall
country.
for my full
However,
reaction on that
I
one.
think that due to a combination of a crisis in Canada's identity and very different demographic trends with aging between the western and eastern provinces of Canada means that the ideologically more conservative and aligned with the U.S. western prairie provinces will want to join America at the middle of the century.
Yeah,
Looking at cycles across America,
that to
history,
me is
the US will likely be
still
going through a golden
still
age
in
at
no,
the middle of the century,
not a chance.
meaning this would look very attractive, while at the same time, Eastern Canada would be going through horrific aging, thus depressing its economy.
I think this
Once
guy
the
might be a
prairie
Wexit
provinces
fan,
go, the
but
tapestry of alliances that hold
we'll see.
Canada together starts to fray. Quebec, the French-speaking
Toss
province
up.
that continually nearly secedes.
I like the Arctic because no one ever talks about Nunavut
Likewise, if these two
or the
regions
Northwest
leave,
Territories.
British
Or
Columbia,
Yukon
which is
apparently just
culturally
belongs
and
to
economically
Alaska. But
distinct from the rest of Canada and the U.S. as an independent country. The Maritimes cut off from Quebec joins the U.S., while Ontario, the proudest Canadian province, remains independent and becomes wealthy based off exploiting loopholes in the U.S. legal code due to its central geography. I don't agree with the modern consensus that the U.S.
bold prediction, and like I said, check out that video. I'll go more into depth. I just didn't want to repeat myself here
really in
again.
decline as a superpower.
But to make it short,
the fall of Rome that so many
I
pessimists
disagree.
believe. I think the U.S. is becoming the next Roman Empire in a real sense, and will experience several gold ages and dark times across the next century, with the current period being one. I think the problems the U.S. is facing now are comparable to the struggles of the late Roman Republic or the Russian Revolution, and is a short period of failure before the U.S. goes through another period of strength. However, this map underplays America's strength.
Possibly,
the US will almost certainly dominate the colonization of space, which isn't on this map of Earth. Meanwhile, when
Will it be? Yeah, most likely. Most likely that the U.S. will really. I think a lot of it comes down to private space companies as well, which are almost exclusively located in the U.S. So yeah, okay.
Looking at Central America and the Caribbean, we're largely looking at how things are now. Realistically, if you look at a map of the world based
yes,
off
because the American Latin allies,
it looks very
they're the
different
ones.
than a worldview based just off sovereign official borders. Basically, every country in this area is a U.S. satellite or ally. However, I think this process will be expedited and helped by the assimilation of Hispanic Americans, which is already
Cuba?
occurring very quickly. Imagine how much it would help American-Latin relations in a country where many prosperous American states are plurality Hispanic, and Hispanics have gained significant political influence, maybe even with a Hispanic president. What's often normal is that former communist countries become very capitalist upon getting out from the boot of their normal...
I think that's one interesting thing is that the U.S. has never had a Hispanic president, but that's something I can definitely see happening in the next couple of years, and that could be interesting to see how that might change some policies within the U.S. would be having a Hispanic president. Interesting idea.
Really hated communist ruling parties and become capitalists since they know how bad communism is. I see this process happening in Cuba. I think Cuba will become the wealthiest country in Latin America, also due to its proximity to the U.S. and the wealthy and influential Cuban American community in Florida, which would probably flood money into Cuba to modernize it. Part 2, South America.
Interesting. Okay, so I didn't quite catch all of that, but basically they would turn capitalist through some method and then become the wealthiest Caribbean island? Okay. All right.
I don't
sure.
see a lot of border
I'll hit with
changes
that.
in South America. As I said before in a previous video, South America has actually been hurt in some ways by its borders making too much sense, in that in almost all cases, South American countries are built around fertile heartlands surrounded by impassable jungles, deserts, and mountains on the fringes. This is a blessing in making this unusually peaceful continent, but also means there's never...
Unusually peaceful? Not so sure. I'm not so sure about being unusually peaceful, but
really okay. Between countries.
I mean, the amount of coup d'etats and infighting and political instability. I mean, I guess if you consider that peaceful, I mean, one sovereign nation has not invaded the other for quite a while, but I don't know if oddly peaceful is the right term, but okay.
I also don't see Latin America really having a big industrial push outside the areas bordering the U.S., since this area really hasn't moved forward economically as compared to the rest of the world in 300 years. The U.S.
But I think that ignores, because Brazil is really one of the upcoming powers, right? Is really one of the upcoming middle powers in Latin America. And to see them not sort of industrializing, which I think he's just using that term for, sort of the old term of industrializing an economy. Yeah, okay, maybe, but why do they have to be close to the U.S.? That's the thing that I don't really understand. I mean, especially with globalization, with the trade that we have now, why do they have to be specifically geographically located closer to the U.S. for them to prosper, right? Why is it that geographic proximity therefore means prosperity? I mean, maybe that's true. I don't know. But to sort of discount a country like Brazil or Argentina, right, or even a smaller country like Uruguay, yeah, okay.
U.S. allies here are the ones the U.S. largely has now. I'm adding Venezuela for the exact reason I see Cuba becoming an American ally. The future of Venezuela as a society is largely dictated by whether they can get their act together before or after we switch away from a predominantly oil economy, if we do. The only border shift I could see...
And really deal with corruption as well. Corruption is what kills nations, right? Corruption kills nations, period.
Is that the wealthy, white, and culturally distinct southern Brazil splits off from the rest of the Brazil in the crisis of the third world that I anticipate in the next few decades, in which central Brazilian power will become autocratic and elite. I would see them align themselves with the white southern cone of U.S. allies that exists in the region like Uruguay, Argentina, or Chile. Part 3.
I gotta be honest, I obviously don't know as much about Brazil as I do Canada, but that sounds wild.
So, okay. I have a complicated multi-step view of what Europe's future will be.
Okay, so Poland's ginormous.
In some future video.
Wow.
However, I think the U.S. is going through a crisis of identity that will result in the U.S. pulling back from Europe, which the U.S.
There's so much text to read. So both America, they experience withdrawals of Europe, internal crisis, recession, civil wars. Okay, experience U.S. Okay. So that's the thing, though. This is so U.S. centric. Everything is about the U.S. It's sort of like the hypothesis that, like, if U.S. is not or is here, then chaos. Sorry, if U.S. is not here, chaos. If U.S. is here, order.
Have little reason to protect. However,
it's just like how Canada is going to be annexed by the U.S., right? No. Sorry, they're going to willingly join the U.S. I don't know. Okay.
Don't think either party realizes how necessary the Americans are to the functioning of the modern European order. At the same time, Europe will be experiencing a demographic and aging crisis that will rip their societies apart. I think this crisis will humble Europe, which will now...
I like how that's World War I borders. But, I mean, albeit, he does have a good point, though, that a lot of American influence has obviously been had over Europe in the past century, right, since World War II and World War I. And as we can see here, even with the Ukrainian war that's currently going on right now, as of recording, that clearly the U.S. still does have a lot of influence on internal politics in Europe. And so, but to just assume that if the U.S. does back away, then it'll immediately lead to civil war and chaos.
Now have to painfully realize it is no longer the center of the world that it was 100 years ago.
I think they've already
Americans
realized that.
will then return to Europe as America's population remains stable while Europe's is rapidly
Balkan chaos.
The Europeans who have seen many horrors,
Bulgaria's
collapsing economies, civil wars.
Oh, okay, so Bulgaria becomes of the Turkish Empire. Oh, they are probably not very happy about that.
Colonize Europe.
Wow, so Greece and Bulgaria are a part of the Turkish Empire. Whew. Balkan boys. I mean, start firing up your comments now. I can already hear our favorite Bulgarian MCS writing up a storm of comments about that one. Wow, what a bold thing to say. I guess Slovenia is just a part of nothing because it's great out there. So Scotland becomes independent, okay, maybe, and then Scandinavia. So fuck Finland. Finland's on their own.
Process that I don't think either will consciously view as colonization, as various European countries have gradually weakened into forming a pan-European confederacy.
Wait, so Romania doesn't exist anymore. So Romania ceases to exist as an independent country, and it's eaten by Hungary and Turkey. But Moldova? Is that Moldova? Yeah, Moldova. Interesting. Okay. It's a part of Ukraine?
Under American guidance.
Portugal's fine.
The
Spain's
explanation
fine.
for this is too long, and so I made it a text wall, but I think the comparison to the Greeks and Romans is very apt, in which the Romans tried to liberate the Greeks and the Macedonians, and then the Romans, who greatly respected the Greeks, tried various self-governance schemes for the region, only to realize that Greek civilization was in active decline, and as the Greeks continually failed, the Romans gradually took over the area. For more details, I would check out the book The Coming Caesars by Amaury de Riencourt, which looks at the parallels between the Greeks and the Romans and modern Europeans and Americans in a very compelling way.
Sounds like a
As
cool
Europe
book.
becomes less a place of power and more a museum of declining nations, borders will change to make sense to more geographically and ethnically based rather than based off some war in the 18th century.
Oh, and of course Austria goes to
Belgium,
Germany.
Austria and Switzerland will likely split or become part of their co-ethnic nations. Likewise, the UK likely divide with Scotland splitting off, partially driven by the decline of Britain from great power, and as religion becomes less of a sticking point, Ireland will unify. As transportation has gotten a lot faster since the Industrial Revolution, countries like Slovakia, the Baltics, and Scandinavia will form confederacies with their co-ethnics to gain more leverage and power in a world of bigger countries. As Europe becomes weaker and more...
Yeah, okay. I mean, one thing that I would like to comment, I'm going to stay away from the Balkans. If I've learned anything from Twitch streaming, it's stay away from the Balkans. But I want to touch on the Scandinavians. I just don't see that happening. How you would have Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, and I guess we'll leave out Finland, combining into a single nation. I mean, the differences in culture and language and in sort of ways of life overall are quite different between those three. And I can't see them wanting to form a mega nation for what reason, right? I mean, maybe, you know, they become more dependent on each other for trade and maybe other things like this, which I'm sure they already are at this point. But in terms of going into one, just like Austria joining Germany, boys, we've been there before. Right? We tried, didn't work. But, maybe. But in Ireland uniting, all right. Probably the most plausible that I think he comes up here is with the UK, with Scotland separating and Ireland reuniting. Maybe, okay, sure. And same with the Baltics too, with them just same comments with on the Scandinavian. So I think he might be the most accurate here with the UK, and maybe some sort of weird things with the lowlands here between Netherlands and Belgium. But I think in terms of Scandinavia, Germany, and the Balkans, maybe not.
Bridge and power in a world of
interesting idea,
bigger
though.
Countries. As Europe becomes weaker and more inside the American sphere of influence, I think the Americans will buy Greenland off the Danes. Greenland is central to missile warfare, and as the world warms, will probably become the center of trade routes, thus making it extremely strategically important for the U.S. Due to the collapse of belief in the shared Russian mission as a nation, alongside their massive demographic collapse, I don't think Russia or the Balkans will survive. For a bunch of reasons, I'm bullish on Turkey as a future superpower, and with the Balkans experiencing the fastest population collapses of anywhere in the world, often losing half their population over the next few decades, I see the populous Muslim world just moving settlers into the Balkans and Crimea, turning them into cultural extensions of the Middle East. I also see similar trends in the Christian Caucasus nations like Armenia and Georgia, which are under very similar demographic and cultural circumstances. The US doesn't have a lot of cultural or strategic interests in the Balkans, and would allow this to happen when distracted elsewhere. But we would see a frontier develop between Christian and Muslim worlds at the edge of the Hungarian plain around modern Belgrade, which is the natural geographic choke point. With the collapse of Russia, I see two powers gaining more influence in the world than Russia leaves in Eastern Europe, the Poles and the Turks. I see the Poles expanding east, seizing Belarus and western Ukraine.
Just seizing it, straight up. just say what you will about Belarus, but it's still a sovereign nation. Poland is just gonna seize Belarus and parts of Ukraine too, with Russia breaking off into separate nations here. Fascinating.
which will become a buffer state between Turkish, Russian, and Western influence. I see the Turks gaining dominance over the Black Sea as they have
so
for
Crimea
most of the
goes
modern
to
period,
Turkey.
using Crimea as a detached peninsula with a large Muslim
Wow.
minority as
Spicy.
an air base to control the region from. I see them allying with Russia's Muslim minority populations that they often have a good amount of cultural connection with, like the Chechens and Tatars, who have the highest birth rates of anyone in Russia, and will only get more
There's
populous
always a lot
over
of focus
time
on birth
as
rates.
Russia's,
You said
especially
there's a lot in the
Orthodox
Canada
Christian
video, too.
population, collapses. The Turks might possibly split off the somewhat culturally distinct southern grassland of Russia called Chernozem as a buffer. Depending on how much the mission of a unified Russia has failed at this point, Chernozem might continually attempt to join up with the fragment of what used to be Russia. Also, spoilers for a future video, I think there's a decent chance that a new civilization develops in this area. Part 4, Africa. There are two
fascinating predictions about Europe there. Wow, I mean it's pretty bold to put these kinds of predictions out there on YouTube for everyone to hear and everyone to see. Wow, I think I would definitely go in a different direction. I don't think everything would be that dramatic. Especially with Turkey just walking into Bulgaria, right? And Greece, and replacing Christians with Muslims, so to say. But I think there are some interesting points in here, especially with he makes a very good point about demographics, and unfortunately, I don't really know. I mean, is that true? Is that not true? Right? How much of an effect is that going to have? But in terms of the Balkans losing a lot of population over the next couple of years, right? I think there's, I remember hearing somewhere that half of all Serbs live outside of Serbia, or something like this. Maybe it was Croatians. I think that will definitely have some interesting effects on the sort of Balkan countries in the coming decades. So maybe he's a little bit closer in that, but some of the things about the Balkans, like, I'm not so certain.
Trends you need to understand
but cool ideas,
to figure out the Africa you see on this map. The first is that I think the Muslim world will industrialize and become wealthy. This is because that region of the world has commonly been wealthy across history, as well as it's the only major one of the 4 Eurasian civilizations that hasn't industrialized. Even so, we've already seen a precedent of industrialization in Turkey and Iran, which will probably set a precedent for...
Like it says here, I have no idea if India is culturally closer to Japan or UK. Neither, but...
the rest of the Muslim world. However, you see no such similar trend for Black Africa, which has none of the preconditions for industrialization. Thus, when you see this mega Morocco, you're looking at what happens when an industrialized Muslim country sees the opportunity to conquer a technologically inferior region.
Wow. So that would be basically colonialism through people that live on the same continent. Fascinating idea. The northern, more industrial, wealthier states colonizing the less industrialized, poorer southern states. Wow, fascinating
thing with the Moroccan tradition of invading West Africa that's happened a couple times. There's also
tradition.
It's pretty easy to build highways across the Sahara for communication, with the Moroccans creating a second empire across the Sahara and the Sahel. Likewise, I see a similar trend of Turkish influence taking place in Sudan and Northeast Africa.
Egypt going to the Turkish Empire. I like how Israel's still alive. Israel gets no new territory. They got nothing. They're just gonna sit there. I hope he talks about Israel in some manner. I'm curious what he thinks about that.
The second dominant trend is that the state doesn't have a strong record in this region of the world and was largely created by Europeans for their own colonial purposes without dealing with local conditions.
True.
At the same time, most African nations haven't been able to construct strong national identities, with their governments often being rackets for one ethnic group to extract payments from the others. I call the era since World War II the UN Bretton Woods era, given that it's been an alliance of American power with UN politics to basically keep nation-states operating even when they have no coherent reason to. This system used to make more sense when most of the third world countries were inhabited by underpopulated peasant communities, but as the third world became more urbanized, literate, populated, and wealthy, political organizations will have to change to represent their identities more. After Asia, Africa is the top region in the world where I expect atrocities and mass death this century, since it's largely the only region that's having ludicrous population growth, which is the big driver for atrocities. Projections show Africa will have 3 to 4 times China's population, or past 4 billion, by the end of the century, which makes no sense, and so there really has to be a big crisis.
Why, though? Because Africa, in and of itself, is a continent. It's not like China that is a singular country. So, I mean, I think it's a fascinating idea, though, with colonization on its own continent. But okay, just population itself is going to lead to instability. Okay.
See the old African order collapse.
I guess South Africa's done for
by
too.
A lot of chaos. I see a laboratory of various warlords, theocracies, and crypto states. I think this degree of competition will actually be amazing for the continent and its future history, since it will create massive pressures towards improvement in creating African civilizations. Sort of like how modern Western civilization was formed in the chaos that came after the fall of Rome. I mean, the main geographic problems that kept Africa in poverty until recently are largely gone, so if Africa can formulate a way to wealth,
air conditioning,
they can achieve it. However, I think there are a couple exceptions to this rule, the first of which is ethnically coherent or resource-bearing territories on the coast that I'm pretty sure would survive and form as coherent nation-states. One is the Igbo in Nigeria, who could export their oil or the oil-bearing mouth of the Congo River, which would become a hub of trade. Finally, Cape Town, which has always been a city-state that's belonged to every continent, I see splitting off as an American ally. Similarly, whenever you get chaotic...
Of course it's going to split off and become an American ally.
Data sets you
of course.
Have a couple outliers.
It's going to be an American ally.
You get a lot of little crazy states. You'll end up with a couple large empires run by geniuses that dominate their regions just off statistical chance. At the same time, sub-Saharan Africa is one of the few places that doesn't have a long history of preformed civilization and cultural boundaries, meaning that this region has the potential for great Charlemagne's, Harun al-Rashid's, or George Washington's who could form whole new civilizations. Although, in all fairness, this state could develop anywhere in Africa, I'm putting a bet on East Africa, which has largely seen the best leadership in Africa so far. Some of the best nation building, and also the
like Somalia is just
what
great
could be the East African Union, or a federation of Kenya, Tanzania, South Sudan, Rwanda, and Burundi, who plan on forming a unified country.
Interesting.
I honestly don't have really high hopes for this working, but of any one place in Africa, I have the highest hopes of this region becoming the empire. As the rest of Africa might spiral into war, neighboring areas would seek protection under the East African Union, with a notable example being the resource-rich southeastern province of Katanga in the Democratic Republic of Congo that would sell its resources east through the Indian Ocean rather than west through Kinshasa as it does now. The final spot is Ethiopia, which I think would be the main competitor to form an African empire alongside the East African Union. Ethiopia is the only main country in sub-Saharan Africa to industrialize and also is the main one that has a large history of a strong state before European colonization.
Yep.
I put Ethiopia as one of the leading contenders for a future African empire. Part 5. Asia. The main trend that I see borne out in Asia over this next century is closing the technological gap that Western civilization...
I want to see how China's going to own Siberia.
In a lot of ways, this is pulling us back into the Middle Ages, in which countries that have had long-standing geopolitical, demographic, or strategic advantages since the time of Marco Polo will again gain dominance over their civilizations. Starting in the West, I've already talked about the Turks a bit in their other continents. In short, there's a reason the Turks have dominated the Middle East for almost all of the last 1,000 years. They have cultural, geographic, and military advantages over the dispossessed Arabs. I think as oil will probably become less important, the Middle East will revert to the large empires that have ruled it for thousands of years, with the Turks and Iranians being the obvious contenders. I think the Turks will win in a conflict against the Iranians, like they've done the last several times, due to their greater wealth, technological progress, population, and sharing Sunni identity with most of the area. The Turks are largely surrounded by failed states, so this is easier than you'd think. I see the Turks as
like it's just failed states.
establishing a series of client states outside their direct sphere of influence, in places like Oman, the Hejaz, and Libya. One of the most fraught decisions I've struggled with in this map was whether Israel would survive. On one end, if the Muslim world industrializes, Israel is dead, since it's so hated by the surrounding Muslims. However, the Jews are a stubborn people that are hard to kill, and I see the Turks, who have a history of multi-ethnic empires and cooperating with the Jews, in effect working with the Jews to keep down the Arab subjects of their empire.
So the quote of this video, the Jews are stubborn and hard to kill. 2022.
However, another point of view is that the Israelis also might be able to create an effective Arab coalition that keeps the Turkish Empire from forming in the first place. I see the ethnic Turkish states in Central Asia becoming allies of the Turkish nation due to...
I think, what role would Israel play in this Turkish Empire? Fascinating idea. Maybe, you know, something like if there was too much aggression from the Turks, perhaps the surrounding states with Israel could cooperate, right? Something like this. It's a really interesting idea of the role Israel would play in this sort of, as he's putting it, this sort of Turkish dominance in the region. So, fascinating idea.
The cultural reasons. I redrew the borders here to fit more around actual ethnic borders in the region because, as of now, the borders of Central Asia were literally designed by Stalin to screw over any future independent countries.
True.
These areas will probably become wealthy and central to the world economy as Asia becomes wealthy and the old Silk Road trade centers grow up again. If the Islamic world industrializes, we will also get the second pole of the Middle East. Iran sees power. The countries to Iran's east, like Afghanistan or Pakistan, are largely artificial, unstable, and created for political reasons, and I don't see them surviving. Under those conditions, we would return to the previous situation in which Persia would have a large sphere of cultural influence and allies in the Afghan mountains, but would leave these geographically tough and unruly regions to their own practical self-governance. I think India will go through a period of painful, intense politics over the next few decades before becoming wealthier, working off the chip on their shoulder from British colonialism, and then move on to becoming the stable, isolationist civilization they've been for the last 4,000 years. I don't see Bangladesh or Pakistan as successful states, and so think that as India continues to grow and get richer, that India will suck in both into their economic and then afterwards cultural and political order. As India mellows out and asks to work with Muslim territories, will start to construct its identity around the shared Indic civilization rather than Hinduism. Burma, which is the rice bowl for...
Fascinating idea. I mean, I wish I knew more about India and Indian politics and culture to sort of comment on that, but I mean, there's a reason why Bangladesh is independent, right? And so with Burma or Myanmar, okay, let's see where he goes with this.
For this region, and geographically and culturally connected to the broader Indic world, will also probably end up in the orbit and as an ally to a mature and wealthy India. The main reason I have China eat so much of Siberia and Central Asia is just sheer demographics. The whole of Siberia and Central Asia combined has a population of less than 100 million.
It's always demographics.
Well, China has a population of 1.5 billion. The thing that's kept the Chinese from populating and settling these areas, many of which can support far more people. I mean, the Chinese side of the border is 200 million people and the Russian is 4, than they do today, is a combination of how the Chinese were militarily inferior to the native inhabitants of these areas who were nomads, and Russian power, both of which are going to go away. I also have much of East Asia join the Chinese orbit, since as China industrializes, it will force these countries into inextricably close economic cooperation. The main thing that keeps these countries from being Chinese allies is that the Communist Party is cruel and morally corrupt. However, in a lot of...
There's also a lot of ethnic tension that comes along in this part of Asia too. It's not just as clean as, oh, well, they hate the CCP. Yeah, there's a lot more factors that go into it.
In ways, the Communist Chinese Party is a deviant from most of Chinese history, in which regimes have generally been pretty honorable and not too expansionist. At the same time, Japan and Korea have been Chinese allies for most of their histories, and have a switch that basically allows them to switch allegiance to whoever happens to be the most powerful country at the time, which is how they've been able to so successfully take up Western culture. What I think will happen is that...
Alright, again, this is just something that I wish I knew more about, but that just... Something about that just sounds a little off. But okay.
As China collapses into its warlord period, the Communist Party will become more totalitarian and cruel. Then we'll move over to the warlord period, and as a reaction against the Communist Party, I think we'll have a nationalist and socially conservative China, but also one that's relatively honorable, and so all the nations in the area would be willing to work with China. Finally, I see the collapse of Indonesia, which is again one of the most fraught decisions I've made here. Indonesia really doesn't make a lot of sense as a country, both geographically and culturally.
It's insane how diverse
But the Indonesians have done a pretty good job of constructing a national identity over the 20th century.
True.
And that's not something I covered about in my videos of countries that will collapse, but I do think it's important. I consider the survival of
videos to react
Indonesia a toss-up depending on whatever the leadership involved is. I have the region split here between Chinese and American proxies, with the Americans supporting Java, the most populated island close to Australia, and the Chinese supporting Borneo and Sumatra and other islands that largely view Java as their oppressor, and also they'd sell goods to the Chinese economy. Whatifalthist, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please like, comment, subscribe.
Wow, I mean that was quite a lot of bold predictions in there. Just to go back to the map here for a second, fascinating idea though. I did take a bit of criticism with some of his predictions here, but I mean overall, like everything was written out, and he had a reason for each of them. Those damn demographics, they break everything. But I'm curious what you guys think. I already know that the Balkan comments are coming. But outside of that, what do you guys think of the Chinese Empire, North America, South America, right? Especially the African colonies here. Sorry, the African countries here, right? Colonizing, that was what I meant to say, themselves as they go more south. Yeah, cool video. Another good one from Whatifalthist. There was 4 videos in here that I think you recommended, and those are the ones that I'll probably be watching next, interspersed between the other stuff. So thank you very much for watching. Please do comment. Love to hear the discussion, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.